The year 1819 marked a period of unprecedented opulence in London's high society, where the wounds of the Napoleonic Wars had begun to heal, and the aristocracy once again turned their attention to the intricate dance of social positioning. Within the marble halls of Mayfair mansions, beneath glittering crystal chandeliers imported from the finest craftsmen of Venice, the nobility engaged in a complex ballet of etiquette, marriage negotiations, and carefully orchestrated scandals that could elevate or destroy entire bloodlines with a single whispered rumor. The Duke of Ravenshollow's residence stood as a testament to Georgian architectural magnificence, its imposing facade of Portland stone rising 4 stories above Grosvenor Square. The mansion's interior reflected the wealth of generations. Chippendale furniture graced every room, Persian carpets stretched across polished oak floors, and portraits of distinguished ancestors gazed down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow visitors through corridors lined with Chinese silk wallpaper. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting ethereal patterns across the marble floors of the grand foyer, where a magnificent staircase curved gracefully toward the upper floors, its banister carved from the finest English oak and polished to a mirror shine. In this world of rigid protocol, every gesture carried meaning, every word held weight, and every glance could alter destinies. The social hierarchy remained as immutable as the Tower of London itself. Dukes commanded the highest respect, followed by marquises, earls, viscounts, and barons, each title carrying specific privileges and responsibilities that had been codified over centuries of tradition. Ladies navigated this treacherous landscape with fans that spoke a silent language, knowing that a flutter to the left ear meant, "I wish to be rid of you," while touching the fan to the right cheek declared "yes" to unspoken questions. Their empire waistgowns, crafted from the finest silks and adorned with delicate embroidery, served as both armor and advertisement in the eternal battle for advantageous matches. The masculine domain equally demanded precision in presentation. Morning coats of superfine wool, breeches that fit like second skin, and boots polished to such brilliance they could serve as mirrors. Gentlemen carried themselves with the bearing learned at Eton and Oxford, their every movement calculated to display breeding and refinement. The art of the perfect bow required years to master, with slight variations in angle and duration conveying messages of respect, dismissal, or subtle challenge. Within this rarefied atmosphere, marriages were strategic alliances negotiated with the same precision as international treaties. Dowries were calculated to the last pound, bloodlines scrutinized for any hint of scandal or weak breeding, and compatibility measured not in terms of affection but in social advancement and financial advantage. Love, when it dared to intrude upon these calculations, was considered at best a pleasant bonus and at worst a dangerous complication that could upset carefully laid plans spanning generations. The season's social calendar revolved around a series of meticulously orchestrated events. Morning calls where ladies received visitors in their drawing rooms while pouring tea from delicate Wedgwood services, afternoon promenades through Hyde Park where couples could be seen together under the watchful eyes of chaperones, and evening entertainments that ranged from intimate musical soirees to grand balls that could accommodate hundreds of guests. Each event served as both entertainment and examination, where reputations were made and destroyed with surgical precision. Lady Mirabel Ashworth moved through this world like a swan gliding across a moonlit lake, her beauty legendary even among the celebrated beauties of the ton. Her auburn hair caught fire in candlelight, while her emerald eyes held depths that promised both passion and intelligence. Born to the Earl of Thornfield, she possessed the rare combination of impeccable breeding and substantial fortune that made her the most sought-after heiress of her generation. Yet beneath her perfect facade lay a spirit that chafed against the golden chains of her position, a mind too keen for the shallow pursuits expected of her rank, and a heart that yearned for something beyond the calculated matrimonial negotiations that surrounded her. The Duke of Ravenshollow, Alexander Greystone, represented everything the aristocracy held sacred. Ancient bloodlines stretching back to William the Conqueror, vast estates spanning multiple counties, and political influence that reached into the highest circles of government. At 32, he commanded respect through both his title and his formidable intellect, having distinguished himself in Parliament with speeches that swayed votes and policies that shaped the nation's future. His dark hair and piercing blue eyes complemented a physique honed by years of fencing and riding, while his reputation for honor remained unblemished despite the temptations that surrounded men of his position. Yet shadows lurked beneath the glittering surface of this perfect world, secrets that could topple dynasties and revelations that threatened to expose the moral bankruptcy hidden behind facades of respectability. In drawing rooms where ladies practiced the delicate art of character assassination while sipping bohea tea, whispers began to circulate about mysterious letters, clandestine meetings, and compromising situations that could destroy even the most carefully constructed reputations. The approaching autumn of 1819 would prove to be unlike any other in the annals of London society, for it would witness events that challenged every assumption about honor, duty, and the true nature of nobility. As the leaves began to turn gold in the squares and gardens of Mayfair, as the social season prepared for its final crescendo of balls and entertainments, as marriages were negotiated and alliances forged, none could foresee the scandal that would shake the very foundations of their world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the breakfast room of Thornfield House as Lady Mirabel Ashworth sat before a table laden with delicate porcelain and gleaming silver. Her lady's maid had arranged her auburn locks in the latest fashion, with soft curls framing her face and the remainder swept into an elegant chignon secured with pearl-headed pins. The empire waist morning dress of pale yellow muslin complemented her complexion perfectly, its high neckline adorned with delicate Brussels lace that had belonged to her grandmother. Yet despite her perfect appearance, something in her green eyes suggested depths of emotion that no amount of proper breeding could entirely conceal. "The Duke of Ravenshollow has sent another invitation," announced her mother, the Countess of Thornfield, as she swept into the room with a rustle of silk skirts. Lady Catherine Ashworth embodied the pinnacle of maternal ambition, her every word and gesture calculated to advance her daughter's prospects in the marriage market. Her own beauty had secured an advantageous match 30 years prior, and she intended to see Mirabel achieve even greater heights. "His Grace requests the honor of your company at his estate in Derbyshire for the autumn hunting party. The invitation extends for a full month, my dear. A month in his company could secure your future beyond any doubt." Mirabel's delicate fingers traced the rim of her teacup, the finest bone china imported from the Staffordshire potteries. "Mother, I have yet to give His Grace any encouragement that would warrant such presumption. A month in his company would be tantamount to announcing an understanding between us." Her voice carried the cultured tones of a lady educated by the finest governesses, yet underneath lay a thread of steel that hinted at the strength of will that would soon shock London society. "Precisely what I hope to achieve," Lady Catherine replied, settling her considerable bulk into a chair upholstered in rose-colored damask. "The Duke represents everything we could desire in a connection. His estates generate £20,000 per annum. His political influence extends to the highest circles of government, and his bloodline traces directly to the Plantagenets. What more could any rational young woman desire?" The question hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, heavy with expectation and tradition. Mirabel understood the logic behind her mother's reasoning, had been raised from birth to appreciate the significance of such considerations. Yet something within her rebelled against the notion that her entire existence should be reduced to a series of calculations involving pounds sterling and political advantage. She had read the philosophical works that her tutors believed unsuitable for young ladies, had absorbed ideas about individual liberty and the pursuit of happiness that seemed as foreign to her world as the customs of distant China. "Perhaps," Mirabel said carefully, choosing her words with the precision of a diplomat, "His Grace and I might become better acquainted during the upcoming social season. There will be ample opportunity for conversation and observation without the intensity of a month-long house party." Lady Catherine's expression suggested she found this suggestion as appealing as discovering a serpent in her jewelry box. "My dear child, you cannot afford to appear indifferent to such distinguished attention. The Duke could have his choice of any unmarried lady in England. That he has shown particular interest in you represents an opportunity that may never come again." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lady Mirabel's closest friend and confidant, Miss Penelope Fairfax, whose morning call brought with it an atmosphere of barely contained excitement. Penelope possessed the kind of bubbly vivacity that made her a favorite at every social gathering, though her father's modest barony meant she would never compete with Mirabel for the attention of the highest-ranking bachelors. Her blonde curls bounced as she curtsied to Lady Catherine before rushing to embrace her friend. "Mirabel, you simply must hear the most extraordinary gossip," Penelope whispered, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. I have it on the highest authority that the Duke has been receiving mysterious letters at all hours. His butler mentioned to our housekeeper that His Grace appears quite disturbed by their contents, often burning them immediately after reading. The revelation struck Mirabel like a physical blow, though she struggled to maintain her composure before her mother's watchful gaze. Anonymous letters represented one of the most feared weapons in the arsenal of social warfare, capable of destroying reputations and ending careers with revelations that could not be openly challenged or denied. That such communications might be directed at a man of the Duke's stature suggested either personal enemies of unusual boldness or secrets of extraordinary magnitude. "Surely you place too much credence in servants' gossip," Lady Catherine interjected, though her tone suggested she found the information as compelling as her daughter did. Men of His Grace's position inevitably attract the attention of those who would seek to profit from scandal or spread malicious rumors. Yet even as she spoke these dismissive words, the Countess's mind raced with the implications. If the Duke harbored secrets significant enough to warrant blackmail attempts, such knowledge could prove either devastating to her daughter's prospects or invaluable as leverage in negotiating the terms of any eventual marriage contract. The delicate balance of power in aristocratic relationships often hinged on such intimate intelligence, with the most successful marriages occurring between parties who possessed equal capacity to destroy each other should the union prove unsatisfactory. "There is something else," Penelope continued, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "Lady Pemberton's seamstress mentioned that an extraordinary commission has been placed for this Friday's ball at Worthington House. Someone has ordered a gown of such unusual specifications that the modiste initially refused the commission, relenting only when offered triple her normal fee." The mention of Worthington House sent a thrill of anticipation through both young ladies, for Lord Worthington's monthly balls represented the pinnacle of social entertainment. His mansion in Berkeley Square could accommodate 500 guests in its interconnected reception rooms, while his reputation for innovative entertainment ensured that invitations were coveted by everyone from minor gentry to members of the royal family. The October ball traditionally marked the culmination of the autumn season, with decorations that transformed the house into a fairy tale palace and entertainment that would be discussed for months afterward. What manner of gown could possibly cause such a stir? Mirabel asked, though something in her friend's expression suggested the answer would prove more shocking than she could imagine. Penelope glanced toward Lady Catherine, clearly debating whether such information was suitable for maternal ears. Finally, deciding that the significance of her intelligence outweighed considerations of propriety, she leaned forward conspiratorially. The seamstress described it as more of a classical drapery than a proper gown. Greek in inspiration, if you can imagine such a thing. Gossamer fabric that would leave very little to the imagination. The lady who commissioned it specifically requested that it suggest the costume of an ancient goddess rather than a modern woman of fashion. The silence that followed this revelation stretched like a taut violin string, threatening to snap under the pressure of implications that none of the ladies dared voice aloud. In a society where showing an ankle was considered daring and revealing a shoulder marked a woman as fast, the idea of a gown that deliberately emphasized rather than concealed the female form represented a challenge to every assumption about proper behavior. Such boldness could only stem from desperation, madness, or a calculated desire to create a scandal of unprecedented proportions. Lady Catherine's face had assumed the pallor of fine porcelain, while her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. "Surely you misunderstood the seamstress's description. No lady of breeding would contemplate such theatrical display." Yet even as she spoke, Mirabel felt a strange stirring in her chest, a recognition that perhaps the time had come for desperate measures in her own life. The weight of expectation, the pressure to accept the Duke's eventual proposal, the crushing certainty that her future would be decided by others according to calculations that treated her as a commodity rather than a human being with desires and dreams of her own, all of it suddenly seemed unbearable. "Perhaps," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note that made both her mother and Penelope look at her sharply, "it is time for London society to be reminded that beneath all our rules and protocols, we remain human beings with hearts that cannot be bound by contracts or consciences that refuse to be silenced by convenience." The words hung in the morning air like the first rumble of distant thunder, presaging a storm that would soon break over the carefully ordered world of the aristocracy with devastating force. The afternoon promenade through Hyde Park had become a ritual as precise as any religious ceremony, with carriages of the fashionable elite following predetermined routes along Rotten Row while their occupants engaged in the delicate art of being seen by the right people at the right moment. Lady Mirabel rode beside her mother in their barouche, its deep blue paint gleaming in the autumn sunlight while the Ashworth coat of arms emblazoned on the door panels announced their status to all who passed. Her riding habit of forest green velvet complemented her coloring perfectly, while the ostrich feather in her hat danced gracefully with each movement of the carriage. The Duke of Ravenshollow approached on his magnificent black stallion, Tempest, a horse of such spirit and beauty that it had become almost as famous in society circles as its master. Alexander Greystone sat his mount with the easy grace of a man born to command, his dark blue riding coat tailored to perfection by Weston of Old Bond Street, his buff-colored breeches and gleaming Hessian boots completing an ensemble that proclaimed his status without ostentation. Yet as he drew alongside the Ashworth carriage, Mirabel noticed shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and concerns that went far beyond the usual preoccupations of his rank. "Lady Mirabel, Lady Catherine," he said, removing his hat in a gesture that revealed dark hair touched with silver at the temples, lending him an air of distinguished maturity that only enhanced his appeal. "I trust you are both in excellent health on this glorious afternoon?" "Indeed, Your Grace," Lady Catherine replied with the sort of smile that mothers reserved for potential sons-in-law of impeccable breeding and substantial fortune. Mirabel was just remarking on how splendid the autumn colors appear this year. "Perhaps you would care to walk with us through the Italian gardens? The chrysanthemums are particularly fine this season." The suggestion was delivered with such transparent matchmaking intent that Mirabel felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she maintained the composed expression that years of social training had made second nature. The Duke, however, seemed genuinely pleased by the opportunity, his blue eyes lighting with a warmth that transformed his normally serious countenance. "I would be honored," he replied, dismounting with fluid grace and handing Tempest's reins to his groom. "Lady Mirabel, might I offer you my arm? The path through the gardens requires careful navigation, particularly for a lady in such elegant attire." As they strolled through the carefully manicured gardens, Lady Catherine maintaining a discreet distance that allowed for private conversation while ensuring proper chaperoning, Mirabel found herself studying the Duke with new eyes. The gossip about mysterious letters had planted seeds of curiosity that now bloomed into fascination. What secrets could trouble a man of his apparent honor and integrity? What past indiscretions might explain the tension she sensed beneath his polished exterior? "Your Grace," she began carefully, her training in diplomatic conversation serving her well, "you seem somewhat preoccupied today. I hope the concerns of your position are not weighing too heavily upon you." Alexander's step faltered almost imperceptibly, and when he looked at her, she saw something vulnerable in his expression that few people were ever permitted to witness. "You are remarkably perceptive, Lady Mirabel. Indeed, recent circumstances have forced me to confront certain complexities that I had hoped never to address publicly." The admission hung between them like a bridge across dangerous waters, offering passage to intimacy while threatening disaster for those who dared to cross. Mirabel felt her pulse quicken, recognizing that they were moving beyond the safe boundaries of social conversation into territory where genuine emotion might flourish or relationships might be destroyed by truth. "Sometimes," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the rustling of leaves and distant laughter of other promenaders, "the burdens we carry alone become lighter when shared with someone who can be trusted with our confidence." The Duke stopped walking entirely, turning to face her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. For a moment, the careful masks they both wore seemed to slip away, revealing the lonely, complicated human beings beneath the titles and expectations. In his eyes, she saw not the powerful peer who commanded respect in Parliament and society, but a man struggling with demons that threatened to destroy everything he had built. "Lady Mirabel," he said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express, "you cannot know how desperately I wish I could share those burdens with someone of your wisdom and compassion. But the nature of my difficulties is such that knowledge of them would place any confidant in grave danger." The words struck her like a physical blow, for they confirmed her growing suspicion that the Duke's troubles went far beyond the ordinary concerns of his position. The idea that she might be in danger merely by associating with him should have sent her fleeing back to her mother's protective presence. Instead, she found herself drawn closer to the mystery, fascinated by the glimpse of complexity in a man she had previously dismissed as merely another suitor seeking an advantageous marriage. "Your Grace," she said, surprising herself with her boldness, "do you truly believe me so fragile that I cannot bear the weight of truth? Or do you perhaps underestimate the strength that comes from genuine concern for another's welfare?" Before he could respond, their intimate conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Blackthorne, whose reputation for malicious gossip made him one of the most feared men in London society. Vincent Blackthorne possessed the sort of dark handsomeness that appealed to women despite their better judgment, while his razor-sharp wit could destroy reputations with surgical precision. His appearance at this particular moment struck both Mirabel and the Duke as far too convenient to be coincidental. "Ravens Hollow, what a delightful surprise," Blackthorne drawled, his tone suggesting anything but delight. "I was just telling Lady Pemberton about the most fascinating correspondence that has been circulating lately. Amazing how letters can travel such great distances to reach their intended recipients, don't you think?" The threat was delivered with the sort of smooth politeness that made it impossible to challenge openly while ensuring its meaning was perfectly clear. Mirabel felt the Duke's arm tense beneath her gloved hand, while his expression became a mask of aristocratic indifference that concealed whatever emotions churned beneath the surface. "I'm afraid I don't follow your meaning, Blackthorne," Alexander replied coolly. "Perhaps your correspondence is more interesting than mine. I rarely receive anything more exciting than invitations to inspect drainage improvements on my estates." The verbal parry was skillfully executed, but Mirabel sensed that both men were engaged in a far more serious contest than their polite words suggested. She began to understand that the mysterious letters represented more than mere gossip. They were weapons in a war she was only beginning to comprehend. "How refreshing to encounter a man whose interests run to such practical matters," Blackthorne continued, his smile never wavering even as his eyes remained cold as winter mornings. "Lady Mirabel, I trust you appreciate His Grace's dedication to agricultural improvement? So many young ladies prefer gentlemen with more colorful histories." The barb was aimed with deadly precision, designed to plant seeds of doubt in Mirabel's mind about her growing attachment to the Duke, while simultaneously warning Alexander that his secrets were far from safe. Yet rather than driving a wedge between them, Blackthorne's interference had the opposite effect, strengthening Mirabel's resolve to stand by a man who clearly faced enemies she was only beginning to understand. "I find," she said with a smile that could have cut glass, "that true character is revealed not by the excitement of one's past but by the integrity with which one faces present challenges. His Grace's dedication to the welfare of his tenants speaks more eloquently of his nature than any amount of fashionable scandal could do." The response was a direct challenge to Blackthorne's implied threats, a declaration that she would not be intimidated by whispered insinuations or cowed by the fear of association with controversy. The moment marked a turning point in her relationship with the Duke, for she had chosen sides in a conflict she barely understood, motivated by instincts that went far deeper than mere social calculation. As Blackthorne departed with elaborate courtesies that fooled no one present, Mirabel and the Duke found themselves bound together by something far more powerful than the artificial connections created by shared social status. They had become allies in a war that threatened to destroy everything they held dear, united by dangers they could not yet name and secrets that grew more compelling with each passing moment. The autumn afternoon stretched before them like a promise and a threat, filled with possibilities that both thrilled and terrified them as they walked deeper into gardens that seemed suddenly transformed into a landscape of mystery and desire. The evening of Lord Worthington's grand ball arrived with all the pageantry and anticipation that the most exclusive social event of the season demanded. Berkeley Square had been transformed into a fairyland of carriages bearing coats of arms that read like a roll call of English nobility, while liveried footmen carried flambeaux that cast dancing shadows across the cobblestones. The Worthington mansion blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their warm glow spilling from every window and promising an evening of unparalleled splendor within. Lady Mirabel stood before her dressing-table mirror as her lady's maid, Sarah, made final adjustments to her ensemble for the evening. Her gown of emerald silk had been chosen to complement her coloring perfectly, its empire waist emphasizing her slender figure while the delicate embroidery of silver thread caught the candlelight with every movement. Diamonds that had belonged to her grandmother sparkled at her throat and wrists, while her auburn hair had been arranged in an elaborate coiffure that had required 2 hours to achieve perfection. Yet despite her flawless appearance, Mirabel's mind remained troubled by the conversation she had shared with the Duke in Hyde Park 3 days prior. The weight of unspoken secrets pressed upon her consciousness like a storm cloud threatening to break, while her growing feelings for Alexander Greystone complicated every decision she faced regarding her future. The mysterious letters, Lord Blackthorn's barely veiled threats, and her mother's increasingly urgent matchmaking efforts had created a web of tension that seemed impossible to navigate without devastating consequences. "You look absolutely magnificent, my lady," Sarah murmured as she secured the final pearl-headed pin in Mirabel's coiffure. "His Grace will surely be struck speechless by your beauty." The comment sent a flutter of anticipation through Mirabel's chest, though she struggled to maintain the composed demeanor expected of a lady of her breeding. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Something in the air seemed to whisper that before the evening ended, secrets would be revealed and choices made that would alter the course of multiple lives forever. Downstairs in the grand foyer of Thornfield House, Lady Catherine paced nervously while her husband, the Earl, checked his pocket watch for the dozenth time. The Countess had chosen her own ensemble with particular care, knowing that tonight's ball would likely determine their daughter's matrimonial future. Her gown of deep purple satin proclaimed her status while avoiding any appearance of competing with Mirabel's youthful beauty, while the Thornfield sapphires at her throat served as both ornament and investment in the evening's success. "Remember, my dear," Lady Catherine instructed as Mirabel descended the marble staircase with the grace of a princess, "tonight may well determine your entire future. The Duke has been most attentive in recent weeks, and I have it on excellent authority that he intends to make his intentions clear before the season ends. You must be prepared to receive his addresses with appropriate enthusiasm." The carriage ride to Berkeley Square provided time for final preparations and maternal counsel, though Mirabel found her thoughts increasingly drawn to concerns that went far beyond matrimonial strategy. The Duke's obvious distress, the mysterious correspondence that plagued him, and Lord Blackthorn's sinister implications had created a puzzle that demanded solution regardless of the personal cost. She had begun to realize that her feelings for Alexander went deeper than mere attraction or social advantage. She genuinely cared about his welfare and was prepared to face whatever dangers threatened him. The Worthington Ballroom had been transformed into a vision of crystalline beauty that took the breath away from even the most sophisticated guests. Massive chandeliers hung from the ceiling like captured stars, their light reflecting off mirrors positioned strategically around the room to create an infinity of glittering reflections. The walls had been draped in silk of palest gold, while arrangements of white roses and baby's breath filled every corner with their perfume. The polished parquet floor stretched like a vast lake beneath the feet of dancers, while musicians in the gallery above provided melodies that seemed to lift the spirits of all who heard them. The Duke of Ravenshollow stood near one of the tall windows that looked out onto the square, resplendent in his evening dress of black superfine wool with pristine white linen and a waistcoat of silver brocade. Yet despite his impeccable appearance, those who knew him well could detect signs of the strain he had been under, a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his normally relaxed bearing, and a tendency to scan the crowd as if searching for threats among the familiar faces of society. When Lady Mirabel entered the ballroom on her father's arm, a murmur of appreciation rippled through the assembled guests. Her beauty had always been acknowledged, but tonight she seemed to glow with an inner radiance that transcended mere physical perfection. The Duke felt his breath catch in his throat as their eyes met across the crowded room, recognizing in her gaze a depth of understanding and compassion that went far beyond what he had dared hope to find in any woman of his acquaintance. "Lady Mirabel," he said as he approached through the crush of guests, offering an elegant bow that spoke of years of training in courtly graces. "You look absolutely radiant this evening. Might I hope that you have reserved a dance for me on your card?" The request was delivered with the sort of formal politeness that social protocol demanded, yet something in his voice and the intensity of his gaze suggested depths of meaning that went far beyond mere social courtesy. Mirabel felt her pulse quicken as she consulted the small card attached to her wrist with a silk ribbon, knowing that her response would be interpreted by every observer as a signal regarding the state of relations between their families. "I believe the supper dance remains free, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her composure. The supper dance was traditionally reserved for the gentleman whom a lady favored above all others, its significance understood by everyone present as a declaration of serious romantic intent. Yet even as they exchanged these pleasantries, both were acutely aware of Lord Blackthorn's presence across the room, his dark eyes fixed upon them with predatory intensity. He had positioned himself near the refreshment table where conversations could be overheard, his every gesture calculated to remind the Duke that secrets once revealed could never be contained again. The hours passed in a blur of music, conversation, and the elaborate choreography of high society entertainment. Mirabel danced with numerous partners while always remaining conscious of the Duke's presence, their connection transcending the physical distance that separated them through much of the evening. When finally the moment arrived for their promised dance, the very air seemed to shimmer with anticipation as he led her onto the floor. The waltz that played was one of the newer compositions from Vienna, its romantic melodies providing the perfect accompaniment to the intimate nature of the dance that had scandalized London society when first introduced. As the Duke's hands settled at her waist and their fingers intertwined, Mirabel felt as though they had entered a private world where only the two of them existed, moving together in perfect harmony while the rest of the ballroom faded into insignificance. "Lady Mirabel," he murmured as they turned together to the music, his voice barely audible above the orchestral accompaniment, "there are things I must tell you, revelations that may change your opinion of me forever. But I can no longer bear the weight of secrets when my heart demands honesty above all else." The confession struck her like lightning, electrifying every nerve in her body as she recognized the moment she had been unconsciously awaiting. Here, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses yet isolated in their own private universe of movement and music, the Duke was offering her his trust along with his heart, a gift more precious than any material treasure he might have bestowed upon her. "Your Grace," she whispered, her emerald eyes reflecting the candlelight like captured stars, "whatever shadows may exist in your past, whatever enemies may threaten your peace, I want you to know that my regard for you goes deeper than mere social convention. If you will trust me with your secrets, I promise you will find in me not judgment but understanding, not condemnation but loyalty that will never waver regardless of what revelations may come." The waltz reached its crescendo as their eyes locked together in a moment of perfect understanding, two souls recognizing their connection despite the barriers that society and circumstance had erected between them. Yet even as they moved together in harmony, both were aware that forces beyond their control were gathering to test their newfound bond in ways they could not yet imagine. For at the edge of the ballroom, barely visible in the shadows cast by the great chandeliers, a figure watched their dance with eyes that glittered with malicious satisfaction. Soon, very soon, secrets would be revealed that would shake the very foundations of their world, and the love that bloomed between them would face its greatest test in the crucible of public scandal and private anguish. The morning following Lord Worthington's ball dawned grey and threatening, with clouds that seemed to mirror the storm gathering in the drawing rooms and coffee houses of Mayfair. By 10 o'clock in the morning, an extraordinary communication had begun circulating among the households of the Ton, a broadsheet that appeared as if by magic on silver salvers throughout the most fashionable districts of London, bearing revelations that would send shockwaves through the very foundations of aristocratic society. Lady Mirabel stood in her morning room, the damning document trembling in her gloved hands as she read its contents for the third time, unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of what lay before her. The broadsheet was professionally printed on quality paper, suggesting significant financial backing for its publication, while its headline blazed across the top in bold lettering that seemed to burn itself into her consciousness: "The Secret Shame of Ravenshallow, How a Duke's Past Returns to Haunt the Present." The text that followed was a masterpiece of calculated destruction, revealing details so specific and damning that they could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of the Duke's private affairs. It spoke of letters hidden for 15 years, of a secret marriage contracted in Scotland when Alexander was barely 18, of a wife who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only rumors of madness and death. Most devastatingly of all, it suggested that this long-dead wife might not be dead at all, but confined to a private asylum whose silence had been purchased with gold. "My lady," her personal maid Sarah whispered, having entered the room without her usual cheerful demeanor, Your mother requests your immediate presence in the blue drawing room. She says there are visitors who require your attention." The summons struck fear into Mirabel's heart, for she could imagine only too well what sort of visitors would arrive at such an early hour on such a morning. The machinery of social destruction moved with frightening efficiency when properly motivated, and she suspected that her family's drawing room had become a gathering place for those who sought to distance themselves from the Ravens Hollow scandal before it could contaminate their own reputations. The blue drawing room had indeed been transformed into something resembling a court of social judgment, with Lady Catherine holding court from her position near the fireplace, while various ladies of their acquaintance occupied chairs arranged in a semicircle that suggested both intimacy and conspiracy. Lady Pemberton, the acknowledged leader of fashionable opinion, sat with the broadsheet spread across her lap like evidence in a criminal trial, while her companions watched Mirabel's entrance with the eager anticipation of spectators at a public execution. "Mirabel, my dear," Lady Catherine said, her voice carrying the sort of forced cheerfulness that barely concealed underlying panic. "Lady Pemberton and our friends have come to discuss the most unfortunate misunderstanding that appears to be circulating this morning. We are all confident that you will wish to clarify your position regarding certain recent associations." The euphemisms fooled no one present, for everyone understood exactly what clarification was being demanded. They wanted Mirabel to publicly renounce any connection to the Duke of Ravenshollow, to sacrifice her own feelings on the altar of social acceptability, and to demonstrate that the Ashworth family possessed sufficient wisdom to retreat from association with scandal before their own reputations suffered irreparable damage. "I fear," Lady Pemberton intoned with a sort of theatrical gravity that suggested she was enjoying every moment of the drama, "that these revelations place any young lady who has been seen in His Grace's company in a most precarious position. The implications for one's reputation, well, they hardly bear contemplating." The threat was delivered with silk-wrapped steel, carrying the clear message that continued association with the Duke would result in social ostracism for Mirabel and her entire family. In the ruthless calculus of aristocratic society, contamination by scandal spread like plague, destroying anyone who failed to demonstrate appropriate horror and distance from the infected party. Yet as Mirabel stood there surrounded by women who had shown her friendship and courtesy for years but were now prepared to sacrifice her to protect their own positions, she felt something crystallize in her chest, a determination born not of recklessness but of recognition that some things mattered more than social approval. The Duke had trusted her with his vulnerability the previous evening, had offered her his heart along with his secrets, and she would not repay that trust with betrayal simply because the cost of loyalty had become higher than anticipated. "Lady Pemberton," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even herself, "I appreciate your concern for my reputation, and I understand the difficult position these revelations create for all of us. However, I cannot and will not condemn a man based on rumors and accusations without first hearing his side of the story. If that stance costs me your approval, then I must accept that consequence with whatever grace I can manage." The silence that followed her words was profound and telling, for she had violated one of the fundamental rules of their world, that social survival required the immediate abandonment of anyone touched by scandal, regardless of personal feelings or loyalty. Her declaration marked her as either magnificently naive or dangerously principled, and in the world of the ton, neither quality was likely to be forgiven. Meanwhile, across Mayfair in his study at Ravenshollow House, the Duke sat surrounded by the debris of his carefully constructed life. The Morning Post had brought not only copies of the damning broadsheet but a stack of letters from political allies, business associates, and social connections, all expressing their regret at the necessity of distancing themselves from his affairs until the current unpleasantness could be resolved. His secretary had already reported that 3 important appointments had been cancelled, while his man of business warned that certain investment opportunities might be withdrawn if the scandal continued to spread. Lord Blackthorne's entry into the study was announced by the butler with the sort of subdued formality reserved for visits of state importance, though the man who swept through the doors carried himself with the satisfaction of a cat who had successfully cornered a particularly elusive mouse. His elegant morning dress and perfectly arranged cravat provided sharp contrast to the Duke's dishevelled appearance, emphasizing the reversal of fortune that had occurred overnight. "My dear Ravenshollow," Blackthorne said with false warmth, settling himself in a chair without waiting for invitation, "what a perfectly dreadful morning this must be for you. I do hope you understand that my own involvement in these revelations was motivated entirely by concern for the moral fabric of our society. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its audacity, delivered with the sort of smooth confidence that suggested Blackthorne considered his victory complete and absolute. Yet as the Duke looked across his desk at his tormentor, he saw something that gave him pause, a flicker of uncertainty in those cold eyes that suggested the game might not be as finished as either of them had assumed. "I suppose," Alexander replied with weary dignity, "that I should thank you for your concern for society's moral welfare, though I confess myself curious about your sources of information. Such detailed knowledge of private affairs suggests either remarkable investigative skills or access to documents that by rights should have remained confidential." The observation struck home with devastating precision, for it highlighted the one weakness in Blackthorne's apparently perfect scheme. The broadsheet contained information so specific and detailed that its publication virtually guaranteed an investigation into how such private documents had been obtained and disseminated. In his eagerness to destroy his enemy, Blackthorne had potentially exposed himself to charges of theft, blackmail, and criminal conspiracy. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Blackthorne replied, though his tone carried less certainty than his words suggested. "Information has a way of surfacing when the public interest demands it. One can hardly be held responsible for the natural consequences of truth coming to light." Yet even as they engaged in this verbal sparring, both men were aware that the real battle was being fought elsewhere. In drawing rooms where reputations were dissected, in clubs where political alliances were reconsidered, and most importantly, in the heart of a young woman whose choice would determine whether love could triumph over the combined forces of scandal, social pressure, and personal destruction. The morning was far from over, and before it ended, choices would be made that would echo through the corridors of power and the chambers of the heart with consequences that none of them could yet fully comprehend. The afternoon sun struggled through the grey clouds that continued to threaten rain as an unusual procession made its way through the fashionable streets of Mayfair toward Berkeley Square. At its head walked Lady Mirabel Ashworth, her normally impeccable appearance deliberately altered in ways that sent shockwaves through every observer who witnessed her passage. Gone was the modest empire waist gown and carefully arranged coiffure that marked her as a proper young lady of breeding. Instead, she wore a creation that seemed to have stepped from the pages of classical mythology, a gown of gossamer silk that draped her figure like moonlight on water, its classical lines emphasizing rather than concealing the natural beauty of feminine form. Her auburn hair flowed freely down her back, adorned only with a simple circlet of silver that caught the light like a crown, while a veil of the finest Spanish lace served as her only concession to modesty. In her hands, she carried a leather portfolio that contained documents whose contents would soon reshape the landscape of London society forever. But most shocking of all was her destination. She was walking publicly, without chaperone or escort, toward a confrontation that would either destroy her utterly or establish her as a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Behind her, at a respectful distance, walked her faithful maid Sarah and 2 footmen whose presence served not as protection but as witnesses to whatever drama was about to unfold. The servants had begged to be allowed to accompany their mistress on what seemed to be a mission of social suicide, their loyalty transcending their understanding of her motivations. Word of her extraordinary appearance had spread through the servants' network with lightning speed, ensuring that by the time she reached her destination, half of fashionable London would be watching from behind curtained windows. Her destination was not, as many assumed, the Ravenshollow mansion, but rather the elegant townhouse of Lord Blackthorne, whose carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction was about to face a challenge he had never anticipated. For Mirabel had spent the hours since her confrontation with Lady Pemberton in intense investigation, using connections and resources that her privileged position had always afforded her but which she had never previously exploited for purposes of warfare. The portfolio she carried contained the fruits of that investigation, documents that told a very different story from the one Blackthorne had so carefully constructed. There were letters revealing his mounting debts to moneylenders whose patience was rapidly exhausting, correspondence with unsavory characters who specialized in acquiring confidential information through bribery and theft, and most damning of all, proof that the mysterious Scottish marriage he had attributed to the Duke had actually been contracted by Blackthorne himself, with a young woman whose death under suspicious circumstances had driven him to elaborate measures to conceal his own guilt. The irony was exquisite in its perfect symmetry. In his eagerness to destroy Alexander Greystone, Vincent Blackthorne had inadvertently provided the very weapon that would be used against him. For the documents he had stolen and altered to create his fiction had left a trail of evidence that led inexorably back to his own secrets. Secrets far more damaging than anything he had imagined about his enemy. Lord Blackthorne stood at the window of his drawing room, watching her approach with emotions that ranged from disbelief to grudging admiration. Even he had not imagined that any young lady of her breeding would possess the audacity to challenge him so directly, nor had he anticipated the effect her extraordinary appearance would have on all who witnessed it. She looked like a goddess of vengeance clothed in beauty, terrible and magnificent in her determination to fight for the man she loved. "You may show Lady Mirabel into the drawing-room," he instructed his butler, his voice carrying none of its usual smooth confidence. "I believe we have matters to discuss that cannot be delayed." The confrontation that followed would be spoken of in whispers for decades to come, though few who claimed to know the details had actually witnessed the exchange. What was certain was that Lady Mirabel entered that drawing-room as a sheltered young woman of conventional upbringing and emerged 20 minutes later as someone entirely transformed, a force of nature who had discovered her own power and learned to wield it with devastating effectiveness. The conversation itself was conducted with a sort of icy politeness that barely concealed the life-and-death struggle taking place beneath the surface. Mirabel presented her evidence with the precision of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, while Blackthorne found himself forced to confront the reality that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling beyond repair. The documents she spread across his elegant mahogany table told their story with unforgiving clarity, revealing not only his criminal activities but the pathetic desperation that had driven him to attempt the destruction of a better man. "Lord Blackthorne," she said as she prepared to take her leave, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had looked into the abyss and emerged victorious, "I believe you will find that your influence in society has been somewhat diminished by these revelations. I trust you will use whatever time remains to you in London to make appropriate arrangements for your future residence. I understand the continent offers numerous opportunities for gentlemen seeking to reinvent themselves far from the scenes of their previous endeavors." The threat was delivered with silk-wrapped steel, carrying the clear implication that his choices had been reduced to voluntary exile or public exposure and inevitable ruin. That such an ultimatum should come from a young woman barely out of the schoolroom made it no less effective. Indeed, the source somehow made the humiliation even more complete. Meanwhile, the Duke of Ravenshollow had received word of Lady Mirabel's extraordinary expedition through the network of servants and social connections that made privacy virtually impossible among the upper classes. His initial reaction had been one of horror at the risks she was taking on his behalf, followed quickly by an overwhelming sense of gratitude that anyone would demonstrate such loyalty in the face of social obliteration. By the time she arrived at his door, still clothed in her scandalous classical drapery but now carrying herself with the confidence of complete victory, he was waiting to receive her with emotions too complex for any single word to encompass. "Lady Mirabel," he said as she entered his study, her extraordinary appearance making his elegant morning room seem suddenly transformed into something between a temple and a throne room. "What you have done today, the risks you have taken. I fear I lack the words to express my gratitude adequately." "Alexander," she replied, using his Christian name for the first time with an intimacy that sent fire through his veins. "What I have done today, I did not for gratitude but for love. I refuse to live in a world where good men can be destroyed by those who lack their honor, where truth can be buried beneath layers of lies and social cowardice. If fighting for what I believe in makes me unmarriageable in the eyes of society, then I choose to be unmarriageable with pride rather than respectable through cowardice." The declaration hung between them like a bridge across the chasm that had separated their hearts, offering passage to a future that neither had dared imagine possible just hours before. In her emerald eyes, he saw not the sheltered young lady of his previous acquaintance, but a woman of courage and principle who had proven herself capable of fighting battles that would have daunted seasoned warriors. The realization that such a woman had chosen to fight for him, to risk everything for his sake, filled him with humility and wonder that left him speechless. "Then marry me," he said finally, the words carrying the weight of absolute certainty despite the chaos that surrounded them. "Not because our families expect it, not because society demands it, but because I cannot imagine facing whatever challenges may come without you by my side. If we are to be social outcasts, let us be outcasts together." If we are to build a new life from the ruins of our old ones, let us build it as partners in every sense of the word. The proposal was delivered not with the formal protocol that such moments traditionally demanded, but with the raw honesty of a man who had learned that authentic emotion mattered more than social convention. As Mirabel looked at him, she saw not the powerful duke whose attention had been considered such a prize by the matchmaking mothers of the ton, but the man who had trusted her with his secrets, who had recognized her strength even when she had not yet discovered it herself, and who was now offering her a partnership based on mutual respect rather than merely social advantage. Yes, she said simply, the single word containing multitudes of promise and commitment that would sustain them through all the challenges to come. Yes, I will marry you, not because it is expected but because I choose to bind my life to yours in full knowledge of who you are and who we might become together. The kiss that sealed their engagement was witnessed only by the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, but its significance would reverberate through their lives and the lives of their children for generations to come. They had chosen love over convention, truth over comfortable lies, and courage over the safety of social conformity. In doing so, they had not only saved themselves but had struck a blow for authenticity in a world that too often valued appearance over substance. As evening approached and news of the day's extraordinary events spread through the drawing rooms of Mayfair, a curious transformation began to take place in the attitudes of those who had been so quick to condemn. The revelation of Lord Blackthorn's duplicity and criminality cast the Duke's supposed scandals in an entirely different light, while Lady Mirabel's courage in confronting her detractors had earned her a grudging respect from many who had previously dismissed her as merely another pretty face in the marriage market. The wedding that took place 6 weeks later was an affair both intimate and magnificent, celebrated in the chapel of Ravenshollow Castle before an assembly that included not only family and close friends but representatives of the royal family who wished to demonstrate their approval of a union that had begun in scandal but had triumphed through virtue. Lady Mirabel walked down the aisle in a gown that balanced classical elegance with modern propriety, her beauty enhanced by the confidence that came from knowing she had fought for her happiness and won it through her own courage and determination. As the new Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow drove away from their wedding celebration toward a honeymoon that would take them to the sun-drenched shores of Italy, both carried with them the knowledge that their love had been tested in the crucible of public scandal and private anguish, and had emerged not merely intact but strengthened by the trials they had faced together. They had learned that true partnership meant supporting each other through the darkest moments, that real love required the courage to fight for what mattered most, and that happiness achieved through struggle was infinitely more precious than contentment handed down by social convention. Behind them, London society continued its eternal dance of intrigue and romance, but the story of Lady Mirabel and her Duke had become legend, a reminder that in a world often governed by appearance and expedience, there remained those who chose to live by principles that transcended the shallow concerns of fashion and social climbing. Their triumph became a beacon of hope for others who dared to believe that love could conquer not only personal obstacles but the combined forces of scandal, social pressure, and the human tendency to destroy what it could not understand. And in the years that followed, as they worked together to transform their estates into models of progressive agriculture and social reform, as they raised children who inherited their parents' combination of nobility and courage, as they demonstrated that a marriage built on mutual respect and genuine affection could withstand any challenge, they proved that the choice they had made in those dramatic days of autumn 1819 had been not merely romantic but profoundly wise. The story of their love became a testament to the power of truth over deception, courage over cowardice, and authentic emotion over the artificial constraints of a society that too often valued conformity above the genuine expression of human feeling. In choosing each other, they had chosen a future where love could triumph over every obstacle, where truth could overcome the most elaborate lies, and where two people united by genuine affection and mutual respect could face whatever challenges the world might place before them with confidence and joy. Their happily ever after was not merely an ending but a beginning, the first chapter in a love story that would continue to inspire and enlighten all who heard it for generations yet to come.